Greetings, everybody. I'm Daniel Foor with Ancestral Medicine, and I'm here with a colleague and friend, Siv Watkins. And Siv is a doctor of microbiology and the founder of microanimism.com, and a great person to know. And we're here today to talk about the pandemic and things related to that. We've had a few conversations about that so far. And we're kind of at COVID year one, pandemic year one, more or less. It's mid-February 2021, depending on where you're at, where you mark the start of the pandemic. And I want to say just a thing before we dive in, which is just a word about motivation for me to have these ongoing conversations with you, Shiv, that one of them is to use whatever modest platform I might have to amplify the signal on the public service announcement that it's really wholesome to listen to people who are experts about viruses and immunology and pandemics and things like that when those things are especially happening, and that I'm a fan of science in that way, and that sadly, at least according to the Journal of the American Medical Association in the December of just this last year, 2020, that the United States, at least, the COVID is the now the number one cause of death. And there we're approaching 500,000 deaths in the last year or less than a year. And I understand people may measure that differently, but from what I understand is probably underreported, if anything. And so we're still very much in it. And it feels like a good moment to continue to maintain a kind of sobriety and discipline and attentiveness and fidelity to the actual data of what's happening, and to maintain our wits about us in terms of the larger relational and spiritual landscape of what is it to be managing multiple crises on Earth in this moment in the midst of a pandemic. So you're somebody who's got skills and background to have a conversation with. So with that, let me say good to see you. And finally, for context, I'm here in Western North Carolina, which is traditional Cherokee or Salagi lands. And I can let you introduce yourself and your location as well.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for sort of maintaining these conversations. I think it's pretty important community work, and seems like the other ones have had quite a good response, so that's good, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm in Albuquerque, traditional home of Pueblo peoples, where we just had a massive dump of snow. So that's another thing that's happening. There's no let up since last year.
Let me start by asking, I know you just offered the Thinking Like a Plague course, and I believe that's coming up again. And so appreciation for you as, if not the only, certainly one of the only people working as a ritualist at the intersection of animist values and microbiology. So how was that?
It's been a trip. It's been a real trip. I was pretty excited about it going in because I spent a large part of my career teaching and sort of teaching subjects that were quite general with a few snippets that I was super passionate about and could maybe sneak a little bit of like astral projection into something. And then I got the opportunity to create this whole course about microbial animism. So I was excited about it, and other people were excited about it, but we're coming to the end of it now, and I really didn't anticipate how challenging and kind of moving it would be. And I'm really grateful to everyone who participated, because everybody's really shown up for the work and been very vulnerable and honest with it. And it's been sort of an exercise in humility for me, but also I'm pretty stoked about all of the things that we can do moving forward with it. So yeah, it's been good.
What's been your sense of the response from the smalls?
Um,
You think they've been into the course? I mean, and into the human attention?
It's always kind of one of those things where I think people go in with a lot of assumptions and projections, and the response is almost always from the other side, like, oh, there you are. All right, cool. Yeah, let's have a chat. You know, I'm quite busy right now, but yeah, let's have an ongoing conversation about this stuff. It's just this really, it's almost exactly as you would imagine a parallel, unseen, incredibly ancient, incredibly edgy universe to react to you the first time you introduce yourself. You know?
Right. Good. We'll carry on with that. I'm glad it's happening. I'd like to start with we're a year in, more or less, and in a way, you've trained your whole life for this kind of thing, as we were talking about before the interview, just like being a survival oriented person and also having a PhD with the emphasis within microbiology on viruses, perhaps not coronaviruses, but nonetheless. And like, how are you processing what you're seeing a year in? What are some of your big takeaways? What's going on?
I think there's sort of two sides to that. Most practically, I still feel incredibly disappointed about the human reaction to what's gone on. And I'm not necessarily talking about individuals. I'm talking more at the government level, you know, in the US in particular. It's definitely worth remembering and honoring the huge loss of life that we've experienced that was largely preventable. So I think a lot of people still have this sort of righteous anger and disappointment about that I think they're entitled to. So there's that side of it. And there's also, I don't know, kind of this affirmation of, well, this is exactly how science saw things like this rolling out. Pandemics are completely natural, completely predictable. And because of factors like climate change and other aspects, the way that humans interact with the rest of the natural world, pandemics going to pop up like this a lot more frequently than we've seen in the last few hundred years. So I'm hoping that we figured out how to prepare for these a little bit more, and that people are paying more attention specifically to where this one came from, and the fact that it's not some kind of evil villain. The SARS-CoV-2 virus isn't an evil villain in a play out to get human beings. Like, that's not what's happening here. It's
Right.
just a virus, being a really good one. And there are plenty more ready to sort of spill over out into the human population too. So that's not a particularly cheerful or hopeful response to that question, but that's where I am still, I think.
Knowing that your own ties are, of course, here in the US, but also in the UK, and that both nations have tanked it pretty hard. They differently, but not entirely differently. Are there examples that occur to you from just tracking the world situation of like, oh, a year in, this place kind of got it right? Uh, yeah.
There are definitely countries that responded a lot more sensibly. You know, I don't even know that we can say that they responded effectively, because it was just common sense. Taiwan did a really good job.
Right.
South Korea did a pretty good job. Australia and New Zealand, even though they're pretty much both opposite ends of the political spectrum, and they're quite isolated as well, they did a good job. Finland was particularly good with communication, I think. So there's lots of different examples around the globe of countries that did some aspects of it in like kind of an exemplary way, but for whatever reason, I don't. The problem is, and it's the same when we start talking about vaccines, like we're only as good as our worst country. So if one country or one state isn't doing a very good job, then the impact is global.
Yeah, at least if we're going to travel and not destroy all the relationships that exist across largely artificial national borders. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about vaccines. Where it's mid-February, I think there's about 40 million people more or less in the US, which is, you know, I think more than 10%, but probably not more than 20 that have gotten vaccinated so far. And I'm not in line yet, but I'll be excited to get it when it's available. I have noticed recently the death and infection rates dropping, which I don't know that that's only from the vaccine, but I imagine it plays a part. There's probably a factor in there. I think a lot of people are wondering, how much it's a factor. But overall, I feel cautiously a little bit encouraged by what's happening. Why don't we just start with what's your impression of how that's going here in the U.S.?
It's been messy. The rollout has been messy, and there's been a lot of confusion and what have you. And that's for a bunch of reasons. But fundamentally, rolling out a mass-produced vaccine to every single member of the population, I don't think it's something that the United States has ever done, ever, in a pandemic situation. So it was always going to be a bit fluffy. That's quite a kind way of saying that. But it's people are getting vaccinated. And the fact that less than a year after the start of the pandemic, when it started getting really scary in the States, people have got vaccines in their arms, are being vaccinated. That's pretty remarkable. It's astounding, actually. So that's good. And I do think that vaccination has had an impact on the drop in numbers that we've seen. But also this virus is sort of, in some ways, a typical winter respiratory virus. So at this point of the year, when some parts of the country are moving towards spring, it might just literally be California at the moment because everywhere else seems to be under 3 feet of snow. But the fact that we're moving towards warmer weather, which means there will be fewer people cooped up inside, things will become more ventilated, that sort of thing, there's going to have an impact too. I don't know, I don't really have much of a sense of how all the good stuff is offset by the bad stuff in terms of controlling the virus. Everybody is completely fatigued. You still got lots of folks who don't want to wear masks, who don't believe that it's real, all that kind of stuff. But I'm grateful for the improved situation. Having said that, I don't think we're going to go back to how it was before anytime soon, or probably ever, to be honest.
Yeah. I'm just going to skim over the magnitude of what you just said to go with my hopefully differently depressing thing I was going to say, which is about class and unequal access to resources, and the way that then takes the form of racism, imperialism, and all the different kinds of cultural troubles. Even just thinking of I was talking with my Spanish teacher, who's Mexican, about the vaccine situation in Mexico. And I think there's maybe less than a 1% or much smaller percentage of people have been vaccinated there. And not to mention, a lot of countries haven't even started that. They don't have access to the resources, to the vaccine. So
that's fairly typical, though. I mean, that's not unexpected for me, and that's a bit depressing as well. The fact that up until pandemic trademark, there are lots of places around the globe that frequently experience really nasty outbreaks, lots of really nasty diseases that are endemic. Ebola in West Africa has been awful and scary for a really long time now. And there are more outbreaks happening as we speak, and they have to deal with Ebola and COVID-19 at the same time. And some of those places have done actually a really good job of dealing with COVID-19 without vaccines. Liberia did a really, really good job of dealing with COVID-19 in its general population. And these are all the places that probably won't get access to the vaccine for the next 2-3 years.
Right.
And it kind of, in that sense, it's sort of business as usual, isn't it? And that's also part of the whole situation, which is just horrible and has long-reaching implications.
Let's talk about the types of things that arise with people not believing in, trusting in, choosing to participate in vaccination. And I don't stay up at night about it, but when it has direct impact on, how to say, the way that vaccines work requires buy-in from people. And so when a certain number of people, a critical number of people, opt to not participate, then it diminishes the usefulness of the whole process for everybody. And so why is that happening? And so let's talk about the first thing of, are these safe? And what do we know about the expedited rollout of them and how that works? And what would you say about your sense? Like, do you have any hesitation about getting the vaccine and all that? Yeah.
I personally don't have any hesitation. I would have them stick it in my eyeballs tomorrow if they offered it to me.
Is it more effective that way in the eyeball?
I don't know. I think I would just feel better. I'm dramatic like that. Yeah, and one of my closest, dearest friends is a surgeon at the local hospital here, and she spent a lot of time working in the COVID ICU. And when she got her first vaccine in December, I cried. It was a big deal. I do understand people's reticence, but I think we can maybe piece apart some of why people are concerned. First of all, nobody on the planet can tell you that vaccines are 100% safe. There's an inherent risk to taking a vaccine, being immunized in that way, in the same way that there's an inherent risk to everything. There's an inherent risk to minor surgery, like you said earlier, driving to work in your car, all that kind of thing. When you're talking about vaccinations, it's kind of, in a really oversimplified term, a risk-benefit analysis, right? Is it more likely that you're going to become very, very sick or die from complications of getting the vaccine? Or is it more likely that you're going to get very, very sick or die from COVID-19? So based on the data that we have, it's very clear that you're much more likely to get sick or suffer other ill effects if you actually catch the virus and get sick from it.
Right.
That's the same with every vaccine.
It's emotionally, psychologically scary to walk into a situation of forcing those odds by choosing to have the vaccine. Because if you're not sick yet with COVID-19, you're like, wow, I don't feel bad. Yeah. So why would I preemptively have to pick a lane? Yeah. But I mean, that's when you sign up for a vaccine, you're signing up for the very small but real risk of vaccine injury.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also trepidation around the fact that at the moment, the two that are registered for use in the States are novel types of vaccine. The mRNA technology. the easiest thing to compare this to things like transplant surgery. You know, at some point, every major advance in medicine and lots of other stuff was new. And I guess it's kind of like, it's not right to say that it's sort of like a social agreement that everybody agrees to sort of go along with doctors and what they say and the new things we should try, because again, lots of people have really been hurt because of that in the past. But it's sort of one of those things where we can't all be doctors, we can't all be pioneers in areas of science, so we have to have, to some extent, faith in the people who are doing this. Yeah. So I understand that reticence as well, and I also understand why people may be concerned that these vaccinations, these vaccines have popped up within a year, like I said earlier, of the pandemic really becoming a big thing. And considering on average it takes 15 years to develop a vaccine and start putting it in people's arms, that I understand why people would be nervous about that as well. But really there's one key difference in this vaccine that took a year versus the ones that, you know, take up to 26 years in the case of something like rotavirus. And that's the huge amounts of money and resources that have been pumped into developing it. That's really what that is. That's the only reason that it was possible.
Yeah. So then we're back to that. Yeah. I have something I've been wondering about. Like, it seems that you can get the vaccine and still potentially transmit the virus. And that is, I'd like to understand more a little bit about how that works. And the other thing I would add is I read something that felt actually very encouraging, that even though if you get the vaccine, you might still get COVID, you can still get it, but it's kind of like it takes, like, one thing that consistently seems to happen even in the somewhat less effective vaccines is it takes the edge off, that there's way less hospitalizations and it's less severity when people do get it. And having like way less hospitalizations, super good news. And so does that check out for you, that it's to manage expectations? It's not that it just goes away, but the severity is reduced, and then you can be vaccinated and still spread it, huh? Yeah.
This has been a question since the vaccines got rolled out, and as far as I'm aware, there's no solid data that gives us an answer either way, which makes sense because we only just started vaccinating people. There's anecdotal data that suggests folks who've been vaccinated, their chances of transmitting it to somebody else are dramatically reduced. That's very, very encouraging. But the reason why we can't say, you know, get your vaccination and skip merrily throughout the population and everything's fine is because this vaccine is designed to prime your own individual immune system. So it basically pokes your immune system and it trains it to recognize and do something about the virus if you catch it. So you can still absolutely become infected with the virus, and the virus can still replicate inside you and you can still shed the virus, but your own personal immune system knows what to do about it, right? So some people might not get sick, some people might get a little bit sick, but what this virus is designed to do is to prevent severe disease that kills people. So that's why if you're vaccinated, you still need to wear a mask. You still need to socially distance. You still need to sort of go along with everything that we've been doing for the last year. And that's also why there's a possibility that this virus might not ever just go away. It might be something that we learn to coexist with, as in the case of flu or the other coronaviruses that we can become infected with. And right now, like I say, we just don't know. There's a lot of long-term information that we're not party to yet.
So if you keep wearing your mask and you keep distancing even after you've gotten the vaccine, presumably if things go well and the variants aren't wildly resistant to the vaccines and enough people get the vaccines, eventually we reach a point where that wouldn't be needed to the same degree.
Right. Yeah, theoretically speaking, but we don't know. We don't know what's going on with variants. We don't know how long it will take to get people vaccinated. If the vaccine is available to 100% of the population, but only 50% decide to take it, we don't know what sort of an impact that will have as well. But,
Right.
you know, theoretically, at one end of the spectrum, we might not have to do that so much. Whether or not it's a good idea that we keep doing it, I don't know, but that's not up to me.
In this moment, something I'm concerned about, and I'm pretty like a God-fearing animist. Like I don't assume that those viruses don't replicate generously in the bodies of very spiritual people or anything like that. I don't take anything for granted. I used to smoke. I'm just like, I don't want to get it. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't want to be the person that's like gets it, survives, but then his life is irrevocably altered because of inability to focus or something like that. And so I'm committed to still not getting it. And man, we have 2 kids. We're trying to like have a life, and it's a pandemic. Parenting is a whole nother thing. And so we take smaller calculated pod based risks that have a lot of conversation around them, right? And I notice even in myself, I'm getting fatigued with it.
Mm.
I'm looking for little ways around it, like, oh, do we have to?
Yeah.
And it's the wrong way to think about it, I think. I mean, it doesn't, the virus doesn't think like, or well, it doesn't move like that. It's not like, oh, Daniel's been a good person. Like it's not like that. And so I'm just tracking the fatigue in the discipline it takes to try to account for beings that we can't see and that we don't have a totally strong read on exactly how they're moving, but we're doing our best guess. We're adjusting. I read like, yeah, there's not actually a lot of transmission from surfaces apparently. I'm like, oh, well, our could have been going on the playground without other kids around for a while.
Yeah, but you know,
Probably.
it's just like
I'm
there's
not saying we didn't know. And so I'm like, so how much? Yeah, let's
there's
talk.
been so much information like that though, you know, like every single day last year there's 5 or 6 articles coming at you saying things like, oh, everybody should be freebasing zinc,
Right.
or you know, you don't have to worry about this, or and it's still kind of happening. Like the other day I think I heard the president tell a young girl that children don't catch SARS-CoV-2 as much,
I
which
listened to that carefully. I'm like,
that's just not true. Like it's not correct. And
well, how is it that isn't it though? I mean, I believe you, but like the children, is it just that they're way less likely to become symptomatic?
basically, yeah, I mean they can still get it, and you know the vast majority of youngsters have not become severely ill or died from it, but
Why have this
a few of them have, you
if
know.
things are so epidemic in terms of the spread, why have the schools that have followed precautions not had bigger repercussion? I mean, I look at like we didn't send our kid to school because we wanted to be safe, and then they haven't had any known cases, and I'm just like, well, should we have done that? I don't know, but I mean, not that you necessarily need to know, but it seems like, well, I don't know that it's true that kids aren't getting it as much, that maybe they're just not as symptomatic. Yeah.
It's like this risk benefit analysis, you know, like do you remember at the beginning when there was a lot of Oh, right. So it kills 1% of the population, but it's only going to be old people. So it's all right.
Yeah,
And
sure.
it was like, you mean our elders? Like this virus
Yeah.
is going to kill all of our elders, and that's an acceptable loss. All right. Okay. I guess. Sure. And then it's like, mostly children don't catch it and die from it, but then there are some who have, and because so many of them have caught it, we're seeing these really, really strange clinical presentations of the disease in children, like rapid onset quadriplegia and you know, the Kawasaki's like stuff, things like that. It's like, is it all right to risk like 15 kids getting sick like that? And also, it's not just children who are in schools. There are lots of adult teachers who
Sure.
might fall into risky groups. And, you know, it's horrible that people have to think about these sort of, oh, well, that's okay, but that's not okay. And personally, I think this, but the government thinks this. And because if we'd have handled it right in the beginning, like this wouldn't necessarily be a thing, and we wouldn't necessarily even see these really strange clinical presentations of the virus because there would be so few cases. We wouldn't see the really rare stuff, you know?
Well, yeah, sure. That, and also I correct me if this is not accurate, but from what I've read and from what little I understand is like the more people that get it, just statistically, the greater the odds that the virus itself adapts in ways that happen to be beneficial for the further replication of the virus in ways that we might frame as evading that approach to vaccination or becoming more contagious or whatever. Not that it's so much like out to get the humans per se, but you know,
Yeah.
advantageous to the virus. Mutations are more likely the more people that get it. And so if you want to decrease the risky reality of the virus mutating and adapting, well, the plan is still to stop it from spreading.
Yeah, we, like, scientists were sort of not, scientists expect viruses to mutate because that's what they do. But the vast majority of mutations don't really translate to anything noticeable outside of a genome, you know? And like you say, if a virus, if you have a virus that mutates enough to become a new strain as opposed to a variant, and a strain is something that has definitively different biological properties from the original virus, which at the moment we haven't definitively shown that, I don't think, it's because it's going to be beneficial in some way relating to reproduction or transmissibility, something to make more baby viruses. Basically, that's the only reason why a virus is ever going to mutate that way. And we kind of figured that there was no reason for this virus to mutate in order for it to become more transmissible, because it's already really transmissible, you know?
Right.
It's already pretty impressive in that respect. But what happened, as I understand it, with these variants is we were kind of looking at the pandemic as one big outbreak, but it's not. It's really lots of little outbreaks. So the social, environmental, biological pressures in South Africa look quite different maybe from the ones in southern England or in Manaus or in other places. Right. So all of these viruses are kind of separately doing their thing in these disparate locations. And then at the end of the month, they all get together and have a staff meeting and sort of decide which mutations are worth keeping. And then they go ahead and they infect a body that is completely different again, and they get more mutations, right? So
yeah,
that has happened because there has been essentially unchecked rampant spread of the virus globally. So it's really meta in that respect. And this is why it's becoming a bit more concerning than it was to begin with. I think there's at least one, I think it's the South African variant that renders one of the vaccines less effective at this point, which is not, it's not, with the vaccines, they kind of hedge their bets. The sort of immune response that they stimulate in people is not predicated on just one thing. It's a polyclonal response. So if there's one little change to the virus's spike, then the vaccine is probably still going to be okay. But there might be one particular change, one particular substitution or alteration to the proteins in the virus that means the vaccine is a little bit less effective. And it's not the end of days just yet, because the vaccines are so effective to begin with, but it's definitely something that's worth keeping an eye on, you know, particularly if it's going to take 3 years for the entire global population to get vaccinated.
I still want to ask, like, how's it going to turn out? Where are we headed? Tell us what's going to happen. Like, I noticed myself being like, oh, it's been like almost a month of the rates going down. There's vaccines happening. It's going to resolve. And, you know, it's possible that it could go in a sort of resolution-y trajectory here. And, you know, it's possible it could be favorable. But a lot of other things are really possible too.
Yeah. And it's not just the virus as well, right? It's like there are lots of other messes that were sort of indirectly or directly caused by the pandemic that are going to have long-lasting impacts too. Economically speaking, ecologically speaking, psychologically speaking, all of that stuff. It's just a horrible mess. And I don't think anybody's even really started about thinking about a lot of that stuff, because it's still very immediate. The thing that I'm kind of tracking is the long-term effects of the virus. It's such an unusual virus. The way that it expresses itself clinically, it's so weird. And I really, you got a population of people who have caught it and recovered from it, but I don't know what that means long term. I don't think anyone on the planet has any sort of sterilizing immunity against the virus. And yeah, it's almost too much to think about. And I think for sure, what we could probably say is that I know a lot of people are relying on the fact that one day they'll wake up and it will be back to normal, like we'll be back to how things were before the pandemic kicked off. I don't think that's possible now. I don't think normal is going to happen. I don't think we're going to get a lot of the jobs that we lost back anytime soon. I don't think people will have to go work in an office again if they don't want to. I think everyone can work from home. It's really shifted an awful lot of stuff. And depending on how you look at it, that's a positive thing with lots of potential, or it could be something that you're chasing for the rest of your life to go back to how it was before. And you kind of got to figure out how to respond to that. You know what I mean?
I feel like I've only really been with pieces of it. I spent more time in the cooker with family this year, so that's good. I mean, welcomed a new person, and I spend all day, every day with family, and so that's good in many ways. And I've learned that it's possible to teach and do ritual and to reach people online, and so put more attention into that. That's been all right. I feel sorrow about not like I've only left Buncombe County, Western North Carolina, one time in the last year. I like traveling. It might be ecologically selfish with the fuel and everything, but man, culturally, I feel pretty, you know, stuck in a way. And but when I look as like a kind of through a spirit lens or whatever, I'm trying to see the larger system. I just feel I'm thinking of Beetlejuice or something, some scene with the sand or like the sandworms.
Sandworms and
Yeah, but
Saturn. Yeah.
yeah, like I feel like I opened the door and I'm like, whoa, and I gotta close it again. I'm like, still sandworms out there.
Yeah.
And like in terms of the collective vibe, like I'm thinking, oh, I have my life, I'm managing it, I'm staying focused as like a doer on the things I can do. I'm taking care of family, I'm trying to tend to like what's in front of me and what I know. And then I periodically look up out of this, like, you know, sort of tank that I'm moving in the world in. And I'm like, the conditions are still jacked.
Yeah. Did you remember, it must have been last year, when you had like a little chat with your ancestors, and that's when you came up with that phrase, the arrow, not the archer.
Yeah, I
And we
know.
kind of got a little bit wigged out about it. Have you like gone back to that place since and sort of been like, all right, so that was a while ago, how's it looking now? Because I haven't. I'm just like, I kind of don't want to know at the moment.
It's hard for like when in February, before I was like, I did not associate it with the virus until a month or so later. But you know, I had a divination with you know, our Luo in Nigeria, and I'm like, what is going on? And got an edgy like Odu or Ifa divination reading, and but I felt like there was this big like hazardous other than me force that like passed over my world, and I'm like, what was that? Like I feel like I rarely feel like spiritually unsafe, but I'm like, something hazardous just trolled my universe. And then it showed up in the reading. You know, we did a Ebo, did ritual around it, and I feel okay. But then later I'm like, oh, got it. And so there's the virus, and I don't know how to tease out what's like SARS-CoV-2 and what's the bigger dynamics. I kind of think it's the bigger dynamics, but my feeling is almost like some interdimensional portal opened. It's still open, unfortunately, is kind of my instinct about it. And the virus is just one of the things spilling through that portal. Like the virus is almost like, well, the ancestors are like the arrow, not the archer. Um, and so I don't have any ill will toward the virus. It's doing its thing. I don't want it to do its thing in this body.
Right.
But you know, peace. But it's like I don't see it as like a friendly. Subjectively, from my position, it's not friendly. Like
No.
it like respect to its personhood, and you know, respect to the personhood of fleas. But I don't want them on my calves, you know. And so I when I see it intuitively, I'm like, whoa, that's a big, powerful, complicated thing. I just don't want to, I don't want it. But then the way the whole thing looks to me is like in the sandstorm, like we're talking about the sandworms, like the things that are now walking the earth that were not walking the earth a year and a half ago in the same way. The virus is just one of those things.
Yeah.
There's other forces that have maybe been there all along, or you know, I suppose they're old forces anyways, but I see the like barf of like white supremacy and like hazardous nationalism and militancy and ugliness in the United States. That's really a recycling of something that's never gone away, but was just exacerbated by the last 4 years of horrible national leadership
Yeah.
in quotes. Yeah.
And stage capitalism and all of that kind of stuff, and all of the like.
There's all the, I mean, there's the stuff that other people would list on the list of doom, like the obvious things, be like, oh yeah, racial injustice and human driven climate change and genocides all over the world and poverty, and you know, so there's but it's my habit in some ways to see those as the really awful manifestations. Like that's the clinical symptom, if you will, of the underlying, not like more real, but like also part of the story, the underlying forces. And those underlying forces, like, like the vision of the really stabilized, compassionate, ecologically well, socially just world is a little bit on its heels right now, is my instinct. And it's not that it's not realizable. It's not that me or anybody else or the people like working for that aren't doing enough. I'm not presuming to like weigh in on the meta level, but if anything, there's like I don't know that what I'm taking from it is generalizable to what other people's takeaway might be. So I don't have the view that it's like God says everybody learn this lesson, or like there's some like same curriculum for everybody. But I think a theme, a recurrent theme, is like, if you're not really ready to fight for and be disciplined about and want it bad enough to have the kind of world you want, other forces will be happy to take it from you. Like there are genuine adversaries and genuinely harmful predatory exploitative forces. If you weren't sure about that before, let it be real known they are part of the ecology of the real and what is. And so, I think the love and light camp is kind of like, damn, well, recalibrating.
So, that's a good thing. That's a good thing, though. I don't get quite so many people asking me now what they should feed the virus on their altars.
Right.
And
the Pfizer vaccine, right?
It's like the virus doesn't want anything. It just wants to eat you,
Right.
I don't know where that came from. I don't know if it's like a sense of control or sort of.
It's like, is there anything we can feed the White Walkers to have them not eat us?
And it just seems like kind of adorable and sort of arrogant. And it's like, I get it. I totally understand it. And I don't know nothing about nothing when it comes to people, but I know quite a lot about the microbial world and sort of the motivation, and I can respect it because it's black and white. There's really no fuzzy areas with a virus or a pandemic or sort of biology or physiology and things like that. There's a purpose, and one of the things is it's a remarkable organism, this virus, and that sort of sounds quite flippant to say considering the impact it's had on people, but it just does what it does really, really well, and a byproduct of that is killing human beings. It's not that it wants to kill human beings necessarily or anything like that. It wants to replicate, and this is how it does it. And it's it all happened at a time that I think everything was already really, really unsettled in lots of different ways. And then this happened, and then the entire Western seaboard caught on fire, and then it was just, and it doesn't seem to be letting up this year either. And I want to say, like, at the beginning of the year, like a whole bunch of us got the same Odoo or something, and we all went, oh, that's interesting. And then like a few months later, it was like,
oh, there it is. Yeah. Right. Like diviners and dreamers are like, something's coming. I don't know what it is, but
oh, that's cute. Oh no, that's not cute anymore. That's kind of like, it's kind of what I meant when I said I don't think things are going back to normal.
Well, I don't think, we're not also not out of it.
Exactly. And
it's
also
not done.
I think the last time
cycle isn't done. Yeah.
No. And I think the last time, I can't remember, it was the last time we had a conversation like this, whether it was recorded or not, when you said, for the rest of our lives, it's going to be really uncomfortable. It's going to be a bit shitty, really, and everyone's going to have to put in a lot of effort to do their bit, and it's not going to be cushy. And I think that's absolutely 100% true.
Well, even I don't know, I was thinking today, it's not really the best metaphor because it's not like we're at war with the virus. I resist that kind of framing in some ways, but if you think of World War II, let's say, and like in the moment, like let's say it's early in the 1944, like the Germans are actually retreating now. like out of Russia, or like they're, or D-Days happened, or like there's a sense of like, oh, the Germans are actually, if we're looking just at Europe, like Germans are probably going to lose. And so there's almost like a bit of relief, but it's not done yet. It hasn't happened. And
No.
so there's millions, or at least hundreds of thousands more people that are going to die between here and there.
Yeah.
And
It's
so, yeah.
Carry on, finish your train of thought.
Well, I just come back to the psychological level of like, I'm pretty anxious and like cautious as a person. And if I notice myself fraying in my discipline, I can be almost certain that a whole bunch of other people are. And so that's, if anything, I'm like, folks, it's not, think like, talk to Shiv, think like a plague, or think like a SARS-CoV-2 at least. And like, it's not the moment to stop doing the things.
It's
Yeah.
very human as well, though, isn't it? To just, like, I had to take a job recently where I was like face to face with the public, like face to face, them coughing on me type thing. And I was pretty bitter about it, but it's like, whatever, needs must. And I noticed that because that was happening, that I was also sort of like being a lot more slack about it in other areas of my life where I normally wouldn't. And it's not, I'm not a social person anyway. I like staying at home and talking to cats, but it's just, it's just what happens when you're like trying to hold a rock above your head for longer than 2 minutes. Eventually, there's a very physical, very corporeal, just sort of sense of, I can't maintain this anymore. I just can't do it. And I really think people are, the threads are beginning to ping around the edges. And so I don't know how much longer that sort of tension is sustainable anyway. It's definitely what we should be doing, is maintaining this level of discipline. But it's like, do we even have the capacity for it anymore? It's been such a long time, and it's been so fraught with mixed messages and poor information and death and illness. And so, I used to get quite annoyed with people, anti-maskers and anti-vaxxers and people like that. But now I have to be a bit more compassionate about it. And what you were just saying about the Second World War, I don't know why this reminded me. I was talking with one of my students about this the other day, about pandemics and how they have personalities almost. So if you like compare smallpox to COVID-19 or 1918 flu or something like that to this pandemic, they feel really, really different. Mm-hmm. And it's quite a good reminder that there's no guidebook for living through a pandemic, like ever. Our ancestors have gone through lots of similar stuff, but it was all framed really, really differently. And it was all in a really different environment, socially, whatever. So it's okay for people to have no bloody idea what they're doing, and ultimately it might just come down to trying to have the best character that you possibly can throughout it, weighing up your decisions and making good decisions in the moment, in the spirit of taking care of yourself, but also taking care of your community. And if that's the best thing that you can do, it's probably fine, and I'm moving more towards that idea, as opposed to a list of, you must do this, 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 and this, otherwise you're a terrible, selfish person. Sure. I don't think that's doable anymore. 6 weeks of a flu outbreak is so different to over a year of a pandemic like this. It's so strange.
Yeah. And I'm in touch with it only in waves, partly because we're still in it, but the backlog of grief that is already present and will be waiting on the other side. It's like once the sandstorm is done, actually, like like finding the communities buried, as it were, and properly tending in ways that were not readily possible with the dead, and also just having a lot of tenderness around the dreams and the plans and the life that isn't going to go the way we were hoping it was going to go. And some of that is possible to feel along the way and necessary to feel as we go. And some of it, when we're in survival mode, it's not easy to feel the stuff because there's still not safety. So just, kindness to folks, kindness to everybody, all of us really still differently in it. And I really appreciate your steadiness and your choice to teach to the relational needs that are all the more acute by virtue of the world being rocked by a very, very small kind of person, and how we are also left, and we have some tech, but we don't really have etiquette and relational frameworks to understand that in terms of our psychological, spiritual kinship map. I mean, some people do, but by and large, it's not a kind of relationship that has deep history because of our, recent ability to track such small creatures. So I appreciate your hashing out of those pathways of relationship for folks and helping them with that. And just for your time and your care in the conversation today. So, yeah, thanks, Siv. And for folks who want to see more about what Shiv's up to, it's is microanimism.com. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a class. When's the next round of the class for the?
The next one starts on April 3rd. So we've got, this one's going to finish on February 27th. And if people want to take advantage of being part of the pioneer cohort of this class and reduced pricing and stuff like that, they can still sign up until February 27th.
Great.
If you want to start brand new with the conversation, then it's going to start April 3rd and goes on for a few weeks. And it's it's really sort of juicy and edgy and kind of terrifying in the biblical sense sort of work, but it's cool, and there's a really nice community of good people growing up around it. I'm really grateful.
Super. Thanks. And if folks want to check out what we're up to at Ancestral Medicine, we have the Animist Psychology and Foundations of Ritual courses open for spring of 2021, and then Animism and Ancestral Healing in the summer. And so we're glad to have people check that out too. So thanks, Shiv, and we'll stay in touch. Stay safe.